everybody. Have to get used to this screen here and the microphone. It's lovely to see you all, and really looking forward to meeting you and talking with you during the day. And thanks, Catherine, for the introduction. I was going to give a little background, but Catherine's already done that. Just to say, the focus of a lot of my work has been on aquatic plants, such as this one here, and the genetics and the evolutionary biology of those plants. I have to say I have way too many slides, and so Catherine's going to give me the nod to tell me when to stop, because I could talk forever. So what is biodiversity? Well, the word first appeared in publication back in 1988 in this book here, which was a compilation of papers on a forum that was held in Washington. And really it was held at the time when there was sort of concern about the conservation, nature conservation, and the links with economic development. So E.O. Wilson here is kind of considered one of the fathers of biodiversity, and he's the editor of this book. We have a definition for biodiversity, and if you take a few moments to look at it, it looks very long. But it's really important that we get this definition correct, okay? It's the variability amongst living organisms from all sources, okay? Terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. And I really stress this because if you notice, there's 3 levels here we're talking about. We're talking about ecosystem diversity, or we could say habitat diversity. So we have all the different ecosystems around the world. You know, we have deserts, we have our bogland habitats here, etc. Species diversity, the whole host of species that we have. And I just want to point out that most species still await description. And then thirdly, we have genetic diversity. And this is sort of the level that's often maybe forgotten about, or people don't really understand. So I've just put together 2 slides on that, and I'm going to step through them and just try and give a little bit of explanation to that. So this is a plant in my garden. It's a Hellebore. I actually got it as a seedling, one single seedling many, many years ago. Stuck it in the garden, and here we have it as it is today. When I look at that plant and look at individual flowers on the plant, I've taken a few photographs, you can see the variation in the flower. There's not an awful lot, okay? This plant, I suppose, it's around about 15, 20 years in the garden, but it self-pollinated itself. I know that there are no other hellebores like this anywhere close to me. So it self-pollinated and produced a range of plants. And last year I went out and I just took a single flower from each plant and photographed it. And this is the range of variation over the different generations growing in my garden. And you can see there's quite a bit of variation there. So that's from one single parent plant and the mixing up of the genes that were in that parent plant, and then over generations getting mixed up. We see the different variation. Today, those plants are all well adapted to my garden. They're growing very well, okay? In the future, I don't know. Weather conditions could be more severe, or a disease may come and may wipe out some of them and leave others to pass on their genes to other generations. So I suppose I put this up to illustrate that, you know, even at the level of the flower, we have a lot of interactions going on between genes. But remember, there's a whole ton of other hidden variation as well that we can't see. So how the plant actually grows, etc. Just to say that in the garden, I never actually notice any pollinators on this plant. It's not to say that there isn't pollinators. I just don't notice it on these individual plants in my garden. However, I do have another Hellebore, and there's a picture up there of a hoverfly, a drone hoverfly, and that Hellebore, a different species, is, what would I say, it seems to capture the hoverflies. It's because of the positioning of that plant in the garden, it's where they come to mate. And so at the start of COVID, just because the particular plants are in a lovely sunny spot, they would alight on the leaves and you could see them mating in flight over that particular Hellebore. So how many species of organisms are there? And I take this from E.O. Wilson's Diversity of Life, 1992. We don't know. Not even, you know, an idea. Could be 10 million or estimates as high as 100 million. Large numbers of species still turn up every year. Of those already named, over 99% are known only by a scientific name and represent a handful of specimens in museums and a few scraps of anatomical descriptions in scientific journals. We don't have time to describe more than a fraction of those pouring in each year. That was back in 1992. A more recent study, 2011, estimates that there's about 8.7 million species, give or take 1.3 million, with 6.5 million on land and 2.2 million in the oceans. Furthermore, the study said that a staggering 86% of all species on land and 91% of those in the seas have yet to be discovered, described, and catalogued. Of those known to science, about 1.5 million. We can look at the different groups. What groups make up the biggest proportion? The insects, by far, as far as we know. Other animals, and that would include various invertebrates as well as, you know, the bigger animals, the birds, the mammals, ourselves, but various other invertebrates, the worms, the centipedes, etc. The higher plants are those plants, the flowering plants that we know, and some of the mosses and the ferns are in there, another large group. The fungi here, and I'm sure Maria will have a lot more to say about this, a relatively big group. But if we look here at the bacteria and viruses in this illustration, you know, about 4,500 species. Is that likely to be correct? You know, we've no idea. Probably millions of species. Norwegian, more recent research using DNA from Norway found between 4,000 and 5,000 bacterial species in a single gram of beech forest soil. And the same study found a similar amount in a gram of sediment from shallow water off the Norway coast. And there was no overlap in the species, so they found entirely different species. So we have much to learn. What does a healthy biodiversity provide for us? Well, it provides a number of natural services to us, and we're all, I suppose, very aware of the term ecosystem services, the various benefits we get, protection of water sources, soil formation, etc. We also get, of course, many very valuable biological resources, food, medicine, etc. And of course, social benefits, recreation, tourism, etc. So I think we're all kind of more and more beginning to hear about ecosystem services and the services from nature and natural capital, and of course natural capital accounting is becoming a very big thing. What is it really about biodiversity? Well, having healthy biodiversity is about resilience in a system, you know, the capacity to recover quickly. We depend as humans on a healthy biodiversity for our very existence, but we have a moral duty to respect the majesty of nature in its own right. And I think this is something I'm sure everybody that's here in the room and listening is you know, interested in biodiversity and biodiversity loss. But it's something that I and others would be very concerned about, that perhaps, you know, we're giving too much of a focus and not actually thinking about nature itself. So how do we study biodiversity? Well, we have a group of people called taxonomists. They discover species, learn to identify them by differences in their different traits. They look at anatomical characters, DNA, behaviour, the habitats they're in. They attempt to understand the overall context of where the species are, the biogeography, so what's rare or what's common, etc. We have the ecologists then, who study the relationships between plants and animals and the environments that they're in. And at this point I might ask, has anybody ever heard of a taxonomist? No. One or two yeses. So you can see here a paper, joint call from the Convention of Biological Diversity on recognising the critical role of taxonomy to underpin transformative change, which is the kind of change we need within the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Taxonomy is the fundamental scientific discipline underpinning biodiversity discovery and understanding. Taxonomy must be recognised and fully integrated into all components of the global biodiversity framework, and development of capacity in taxonomy is critical to the successful implementation of the global biodiversity framework. So, in case I don't get to the end, I'll make the point now: we need more taxonomists and field biologists. So how did we get to this species diversity? Well, it's been the result of 3.5 billion years of evolution of organisms, resulting from complex interactions between climate, geology, including various glaciations, the soils, other biological life, etc., a number of factors. We have species with worldwide distributions, for example, the killer whale, the orcas, cats, dogs, humans. Or you might be familiar with the common reed, Phragmites. It has a global distribution, a worldwide distribution. Then we have species with much narrower distributions. And we might look at endemics, those restricted to particular geographical areas. And one example of that would be the Irish marsh orchid. And you can see the distribution map down the bottom there for the Irish marsh orchid, endemic to Ireland. We have what we call generalist species, those that use a wide range of resources. And we have specialised species, those that need very special resources or requirements. So we must keep all of this in mind when we're talking about species diversity at that level of the species. So as I say, a number of interactions, and I've just put up a few pictures. We were talking there, and we've definitely got a couple of people way more expert than me on this in the audience. But, you know, the underlying geology, when we look at Ireland and what we have to think way back millions of years when continents were sliding around the place and crashing into one another, to look to the formation of Ireland. So I've just put up a couple of images just really to reinforce that, you know, when you go to different parts of Ireland, as we know, you'll find different underlying rock types. If you're in Wicklow, you know, you will be on granites, and, you know, if you go to the Burren, you'll be on limestone. And I suppose the picture here of Loch Shinny, which I certainly wasn't aware of until putting this together, you know, you see, so Loch Shinny is in North County Dublin. You can see really clear evidence of that strong clashing together of the continents. And so making up the underlying geology, rock type, and therefore the soils in Ireland. Of course, we had the major glaciations and the retreat of the glaciers, and that has had a huge impact as well on Ireland. So you can see Ireland down here on the bottom left-hand corner. And, you know, we see loads of evidence of glaciation in the landscape, but I just put up a couple of images, and I suppose one, the middle there, the top is Pollardstown Fen, and down the bottom to, I suppose, you know, just sort of cast your mind back to a period when, you know, there was way lot more water covering Ireland. And here a stone from County Offaly called the mushroom stones. I don't know if anybody's ever seen them, you know, and you can see evidence. I don't know if, will my pointer, it's not going to come on the screen, but you can see evidence in the stones of when water was at a much higher level and, you know, splashing against and eroding the stone. So a number of different factors, as I say. Again, climate, and of course, you know, our lovely oceanic climate here in Ireland on the edge of Europe makes us unique. And, you know, again, if we go to the Burren, the karst landscape there, we can see evidence of, you know, the rainwater interacting with the limestone to cut out this wonderful landscape, which is, botanically speaking, very, very important. Again, humans have had a huge impact, and we see evidence of you know, human impact on the landscape. And if anybody ever gets the chance to visit the Cage Fields and the Heritage Centre there, it's well worthwhile visiting. But right down to even more, I suppose, relatively recent times, you know, in the formation of our hedgerow systems, and Eamon will talk a lot about that later today. So all of these various factors, you know, have combined to give us the various habitats that we have and the resultant species. And I'm a little bit biased in the species that I have up there. I'm kind of, it's not an overall well distributed, it's basically the photographs that I could pull out. But I suppose the fascination, and for me, you know, the one I've kind of put in the centre there, the bladder work, you know, those tiny little circles that you see, it's a water plant, are tiny little bladders that take up organisms from the water and digest them for food, okay? So, as I say, it's not possible, you know, and I guess I just want to say it's really just a representation of some of the photographs, but we, you know, so much diversity. Do we know all that there is to know? No, we don't. We know quite a lot for, you know, the higher organisms, but in terms of soil biodiversity, fungi, you know, there's a lot more that needs to be done. So certain areas need an awful lot more work. Therefore, we must conserve our high nature value habitats and ecosystems to support the variety of species that live there, plants, animals, lichen, fungi and other microorganisms, and conserve the genetic diversity within those species that have adapted over a long time to conditions in Ireland. This genetic diversity will make them more resilient to future change, diseases, and of course climate change that we're all aware of. And I suppose it's reputed that Leonardo da Vinci said this: we know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot. Well, not a lot has changed. So just a brief, and I'll skip through these quickly, a brief sort of background for anybody that doesn't know about our protected sites, because I often get asked this question. So we have what's known as the Habitat Directive, the EU directive, came into law in Ireland in 1997. The main aim was the conservation of biodiversity by requiring member states to take measures to maintain or restore natural habitats and wild species listed on various annexes to the directive, to keep those at a favourable conservation status. So as I say, there's a number of annexes. Annex 1 deals with the habitats that are to be protected, and Annex 2, 4 and 5 deal with species. It's one of the most important pieces of legislation governing the conservation of biodiversity in Europe. So these are sites that are of European importance and species. The Birds Directive, actually the Birds legislation was much earlier, but was revised then in 2009. And I guess we have the birds people to thank for a lot of our protected sites. So I just put up a little bit of background here, and I'll flick through it quickly. As I say, Annex 1 is the habitat types, whose conservation requires the designation of SACs, or special areas of conservation. Annex 2, animal and plant species, whose conservation requires the designation also of special areas of conservation. And then Annex 4 deals with animal and plant species in need of strict protection, protected wherever they occur. And 5 is animal and plant species whose taken in the wild and exploitation may be subject to management measures. At a national level, our basic designation for wildlife is the natural heritage areas, And these are areas considered important for the habitats present, or important for holding species of plants and animals whose habitats need protection, or sites of geological interest. And to date, we have, as far as I know, 75 raised bogs given legal protection, 73 blanket bogs, and we have 630 proposed natural heritage areas. However, these were proposed on a non-statutory basis back in 1995, and so work is still ongoing to assess whether they'll be given full designation. Some of them are tiny, they might be just roosting places for rare bats. And the Geological Survey of Ireland is compiling a list of geological and geomorphological sites in need of protection. And then finally, we have our national parks, our 6 state-owned, or our 7 state-owned national parks. So just an overview, as I say, the European legislation covers the SACs and the SPAs, and together they form this Natura 2000 ecological network. Then we have the national sites, the NHAs and the PNHAs, and the national parks. And for anybody interested, your county development plan or local area plan should all list these sites in your area. So how are we doing with our most protected, you might say, sites, our EU sites? Well, we're required every 6 years to report on the status, and our most recent report lists only 15% of habitats in favourable condition. These are our most protected, theoretically, habitats. And the trends aren't looking too good either. I'm happy at the end if anybody wants to email me. I have a number and I don't have time to go through them, but there's a number of articles linked if people are interested in reading them. I'd also recommend one great book if you're not aware of it already, and it's Whittled Away, Ireland's Vanishing Nature by Pádraig Fogarty. And he deals in a lot of detail in terms of the marine environment and the national parks. So good to, it's an excellent book to actually see, what is actually happening in these areas. So what are the causes of biodiversity loss in protected and unprotected habitats? Well, numerous factors, and I suppose overall we have to consider global population growth, in terms of global biodiversity loss. And I guess, if you just go back and look in the 1950s and what was the world population then, about 2.5 billion, we're expected next year to reach 8 billion people. So my lifetime in a little bit. Intensive agriculture, certainly here in Ireland, our forestry policy, increased urbanisation and development in general, invasive species and increased global trade and movement, pollution, mineral extraction, climate change, of course, and fossil fuels. And increasingly here in Ireland, tourism is impacting on our habitats. And again, in an overall context, our wasteful consumption and this what's known now as the increased flattening of the world. So as we get more people moving around the globe, aspiring to a westernized, wasteful lifestyle. In terms of global biodiversity loss, we have to realize that 2/3 of the people on the planet had no responsibility for us. It is very much our Western lifestyle. In terms of EU and national policy, how has that been responsible for biodiversity loss? Well, definitely several actions over the years, and one driven by these policies. Back in the 1980s, we saw huge blanket bog destruction because of increased headage payments for sheep, where basically the sheep stripped and left the ground bare, and subsidence happened then. And more recently, until the present cap, no space for nature. So, if you had rough or scrub areas on your land, you weren't getting paid for them. And of course, more recently, back in August 2021, we had the publication of the policy document in terms of Food Vision 2030 and agriculture and where we were going. And many of you here are probably aware that the Environmental Coalition withdrew from the negotiations in the run-up to the publication of that document, and subsequently published their own strategy vision for agriculture in Ireland. So there's been a number of activities that have had a negative impact in terms of farming and wildlife in Ireland, and I suppose going back to the 1950s, even land drainage and reclamation. increased livestock densities, more recently the intensive use of fertilisers, pesticides, the complete removal of habitats such as hedgerows, and the destruction of habitats, for example, woodland, bogs, wetlands and lakes through pollution and invasive species. Increased large monocultures as opposed to the mixed diverse farms that we had 50 years ago, and reduction in small scale tillage cropping, especially spring sown crops. I just threw up a few slides. This is a farm. I was had huge knowledge of it. It was my mother's family farm, and that's it. There was over 100 acres in it, and you can see to the right there a fen at the bottom of it. That's how it looks today. If you walk along the roadway, that's how it looks. On both sides, the bottom one there, you're looking in towards the fen. You've had depositing of soils in there, levelling off, reseeding of grass. If you look up the driveway, you'll see that it's all sprayed off the whole way up along the driveway. Down the bottom here beside the gate, I have clear memories of sitting with my mother many years ago when she showed me the beech seed, because the beech fruit, we were sitting underneath a beech tree. But I, as a child, one summer, about the age of 5, my goal for that summer was to fill, does anybody remember the mushroom chip baskets? My goal for that summer was walking this road and filling the basket with grass seed. Don't know why I was doing it, have no idea. But I do know that by pulling the grasses, I was actually learning my grasses. More recently, we've been advised of this kind of management of our hedgerows, and Eamon will talk a lot more. This trimmed, lollipop sticking up hedgerows. Are these hedgerows or are they hedges? We have to be really careful. I walked these hedgerows back last March, and there was nothing in them, absolutely nothing. No insects, no birds, nothing. And here, the grassland, we can see, reseeded, heavily fertilised, basically just perennial ryegrass and some clover in it. Our forestry policy, I guess if you're from Leitrim, you know all about that. Monoculture, Sitka spruce forestry, clear felling, pesticide and runoff associated. So a huge amount of pesticides used in terms of establishing the plantations, and then the clear fell and the runoff into our waterways. Recently this week we had the announcement of a new forestry programme, 1.3 billion. The programme hasn't been published yet, we don't actually know, but it's, there is talk of continuous cover forestry and native species. But we need a lot more expertise, not just advice on grant payments. We really do need the expertise in how to manage forestry. I also draw your attention to something that happened recently as well, in terms of in Brackloon Wood, an ancient woodland in Mayo, and here we had a company from Scotland, Rhizocor Technologies, coming to sample mushrooms in the woodland, to take them back, to grow them in the lab as bioenhancers. So to be able to plant a tree and pop a pellet of a fungus in, or a mixture in, to help the tree to grow. So Maria is going to talk a lot more about fungi and the mycorrhizal relationships and you'll have a much better understanding of why many of us would be extremely concerned. So this is what we're calling the new bioeconomy. Water quality, well, you know, about half of our surface waters have sound ecological status. That means that, you know, if the water bodies don't have sound ecological status, then they're not supporting the species that they should be. Biodiversity loss. How did we get there? Well, agriculture and runoff from the use of nitrogen fertilizers, from intensive farming. But we also have other pressures in terms of, you know, domestic water treatment systems and urban surface water runoff. So I just put that up there in terms of the Water Framework Directive. So under the Water Framework Directive, we were supposed to have sound ecological status by at the latest 2027, 2015 first, then 2027. We're going to find it really hard to get there. And I just put this up because you know, I am not sure how many people would be aware of the nitrates derogation, or the ability by some farmers to be able to apply to be able to have a higher stocking rate of organic manure on their farms. And this is a map that was fairly recently published. There's been over 6,000 applications in 2021 for this derogation. But as a condition, in the most recent derogation, hedgerows on the holding shall be managed in accordance with guidance issued under Article 22.2, and management practice shall include as a minimum the following: 1 mature whitethorn, blackthorn tree shall be retained in each hedgerow, and the hedgerows shall be maintained on a minimum 3-year cutting cycle. 1 tree in a hedgerow. And of course we know, you know, hedgerows are hugely important in terms of, you know, filtering and you know, if we're to look at the services that hedgerows supply, apart from the habitats that they are in themselves. Inappropriate development, this is one or two of us here in the audience are well aware of. This was a hedgerow in our town recently. It was one of the strategic developments, and as part of the planning application, this hedgerow was just left out of the application. It was just omitted. When it was contested, the Hellebore Planala, or pointed out, I should say, the Hellebore Planala planner said that the hedgerow should be retained, but the final decision just ignored the hedgerow. It didn't mention it at all. It wasn't a very species diverse hedgerow, but it was an important hedgerow in our town because it was an old hedgerow. It linked the canal to another green area. And we knew there were pine martens and bats and various other creatures in that hedgerow. But we tried, but one morning recently, it came a croppers. And in its place went birch trees from who knows where, and laurel hedging. And this is only a couple of weeks back. At the same day, I walked up, and this other hedgerow at the other end of the site is supposed to be retained, but already the soil has been heaped up and the hedgerow potentially damaged. Another site in our town, this was originally a wetland meadow, and it's about 3 years ago now. To the right there, you had a housing development built, and of course all the vegetation stripped out. We had beech hedging and laurel hedging and Portuguese laurel and sickly looking trees planted, And all along the roadway we had a wildflower meadow. This is back earlier on in the year. 4 county council, local authority workers, a JCB and a van one morning to trim the wildflower strip, because the wildflower strip had turned into creeping thistle, and thistles were sticking out of the barrier and people couldn't walk along the footpath. And you can see in the centre picture there that day what remained of the actual wildflowers. Incidentally, the first week the houses went on sale, they all sold out. The second week they were all underwater. Invasive species. I'm putting up this example. You can see the tree here in County Meath, dead as a doornail. We can see them all over the country, dead and dying. But I really wanted to point out, because we talk about it as a disease, and I actually put up this farmers to be hit with liability, because I was talking to a group of farmers during the week, and they didn't actually know about ash dieback, which, you know, I suppose maybe I'm just talking about these things so often, but it's caused by a fungus-like organism. We know so little that for a long time we actually thought it was a fungus, but it's not. It's a fungus-like organism. Sorry, excuse me. I am in another planet altogether. It is a fungus. Hymenoscyphus fraxineus. I'm thinking of something else. I'm thinking of a Phytophthora. It is caused by a fungus. Okay, and this fungus was brought in on plants that were imported. There was back in 2012. So a bit of a similar situation today. We had big drive to plant trees, and we wanted lots of ash trees because there was a market for Hurleys, and we didn't have enough stock in the country. So we went abroad, and in bringing in that stock, we brought in this fungus, Hymenoscyphus, and you know, that fungus has run through the country and infected and caused this disease called ash dieback. So I really want to stress, you know, often when we hear about invasive species, we tend to see the big things, you know, the Rhododendron ponticum, the Himalayan balsam. You know, if we look at action plans in terms of our councils, these are the species that are noted. These are the big species, we can actually see them. The real threats for many of us are the things we can't really see, especially with importation. This is a road close to me at home. I just stood at a gateway, and top 2 pictures, when I look right and look left, all those trees, ash, dead or dying, covered in ivy, ready to fall. At the roadway here, completely dead tree, and lots of trees, dead or dying, but covered in ivy, and so real risks. And to point out that we have many more trees in Ireland that are currently affected with imported pests and pathogens. Excessive waste and pollution. Anybody involved with tidy towns? Am I another 15 minutes, is it? Yeah, brilliant, thanks Catherine. Would be aware of this. I guess I had a lot more slides about what we could do, but a question that we would ask is, you know, how effective is it really going out, tidying up this? Are we addressing the problem? Because many of us don't see the work that volunteers do, and it's a handful of volunteers everywhere. And for example, down on the right-hand side, you know, every time now, this is every week, twice a week during summer, this is what's left, you know, at this bin, collected just from a small area. Then people go out and respond to dumpings or they do big tidy ups. So there's a stretch just up to the roadway, 22 bags of rubbish. We have to tackle this. Tourism, we've our greenways and our blueways, Wild Atlantic Way. Actually, I see our national parks have now been rebranded. It's worth actually going onto the National Parks website and look at the rebranding. Ecotourism stands out there. What has tourism and increased footfall brought with it? You know, this is our canal here, okay, you know, this is just the harbour, but it's pretty much, if you go up along the Greenway, this is what you see, you know, and I think any of us, again, out and about, you know, will notice these plastic bags of dog poop just, you know, held for a while and then fired into the canal, into the hedgerow. But it's not just the littering, you know, it's often the things we mightn't consider in terms of the lighting and the effects of lighting. And, you know, certainly the LED lighting that's gone in around our town, you know, we now realise, we thought it was better, but we now realise that actually it's having an impact on wildlife. So again, the more these places that are opened up for public access, you know, the more lighting that's going in. Sometimes I long for the mornings where you could just walk on the canal. You know, there was no footpath. You just got out there and enjoy it for what it was. I want to just bring something to people's attention. This was a conference that was held last year by the Climate Bar Association. I don't know if anybody attended it. I was really impressed by the amount of work they did in bringing this conference together and this study they did prior to holding it. But some of their key findings were that access to information on enforcement on environmental law is difficult for members of the public. Sanctions, if imposed, often too low to deter perpetrators, and the environment is routinely harmed. There's a need for environmental law in Ireland, which is hugely complex, to be unified and modified through a model environmental code, embracing all relevant law in one accessible document, and the need for a dedicated environmental court. So I guess, you know, the people at the symposium were talking about how difficult it was for them as professionals to wade through the various bits and pieces of environmental legislation we have, let alone the general public or somebody who might have an issue. And of course, again, enforcement is another issue entirely. Here's our canal again. You can see this is July this year, sprayed with Roundup. We know it was Roundup. We actually know the operator didn't even have protective gear on. Here it is a month later. What was the purpose of this? Was it for aesthetics? It was breaking the law in a number of ways, right up to the very edge of the motorway. Obviously no integrated pest management plan, which is required under the law for professional operators to have a plan for an area, because the middle picture there shows you after it was sprayed, you still had weeds growing and going to seed. Okay, and so what actually they're doing is they are selecting for more resistant weeds. And that's what you see. So very quickly within spraying it, you have, you know, annual meadow grass, you have willow herbs, and a number of species that are resistant or can run to seed very quickly after being sprayed. This is, you know, the inland waterways, and as I say, a number of elements being broken. This was actually reported, but there was no outcome from it. I would just want to bring your attention to one or two words, okay? And one word that is increasingly coming in, particularly you'll see it in your development plans, if you read your development plans or if you interact in terms of your local area plans or etc. It's the term green infrastructure, okay? And so this report was drawn up in 2010, and it's defined as an integrated network of green space that conserves natural ecosystems, values and functions, and provides associated benefits to human populations. Okay? It doesn't say that conserves natural ecosystems. It says that conserves natural ecosystem values and functions. I'm going to leave the word on that to E.O. Wilson. Like most mistaken philosophies, the Anthropocene worldview is largely a product of well-intentioned ignorance. Its call for a new human-centred approach to conservation, more precisely anti-conservation, has multiple sources. First is a false image of the history of conservation organisations. Second is an inadequate grasp of the biodiversity database. A third, less obvious source is the mistaken emphasis on ecosystems as the key level of biological organisation, to the near exclusion of species and genes. Take a look at what's in your development plans. I just picked out randomly last night, South Dublin. Green infrastructure can be defined as strategically planned networks of high quality natural and semi-natural areas with other environmental features, which is designed and managed to both deliver a wide range of ecosystem services and protect biodiversity in rural and urban settings. An advantage of the green infrastructure is a spatial structure providing benefits from nature to people that enhances nature's ability to deliver multiple valuable ecosystem goods and services such as clean air or water. It provides positive synergies between several functions in the environment. All sounds good, doesn't it? Here's some green infrastructure we had designed in Kilcock. Apologies for the top photograph. I don't have a very good camera on my phone. These trees were planted at huge expense. Okay, I know from my background, inappropriate trees, inappropriate spacing, all staked, expensive trees, all staked and membrane put down underneath them, and then that was the end of it. A contractor hired to do it. The bottom photograph here shows you the state of the trees 2 years later. The nursery ties weren't even taken off, or the canes. Many of them fell over. We got the scouts out to release some of them. Some of them will survive. Here's another example. This is green infrastructure. However, this green infrastructure, possibly, these are all rowans. We now have a virus attacking our rowans. Whether it's a case, it's the virus, or it's just a case that they were poorly planted in an urban situation. Again, Bertie Ahern, when he was in Taoiseach, he did great works around and about the local area. And here in Drumcondra, we had these carpinus, these hornbeams planted. I walked during the summer down the street, and 80% of them are dead. Massive expense, green infrastructure. Another word, are words that increasingly we're seeing are nature-based solutions. This plant here, anybody know it? Sea buckthorn, hippophae. It was introduced along the east coast to stabilise sand dunes as a nature-based solution. It's now become a hugely invasive species. And there's several other examples of nature-based solutions where species were introduced to tackle particular problems and later became problematic or invasive. Finally, the other word I want to pause on is enhancement of biodiversity. What does enhancement mean? An increase or improvement in quality, amount, or strength of something. Well, we've been trying to enhance biodiversity for a long time. We've been gardening. We've been putting our perception on what we think enhancement is. Do we really have the expertise to enhance natural systems? We don't understand them. We don't understand the species. And I think I might be well over at that, Catherine, and I had a whole load of more slides of what can we do. Thank you for listening. Any questions at this point? Have we time for questions, Catherine? This speaker is very unresponsive. I should have taken that, actually. That would have been easier.
Oh, sorry. I should have offered. Yeah, we have time for maybe one or two questions. Maybe if we take two at the same time, and that might be just speed it up a little. So we have one. Would you want it, Mike? Yeah. And we have two. Actually, I'll give you it for the recording at home, so people can hear.
Sorry, Ursula, I'd love to see the rest of the slides at some point, just to give us some examples of what we can do.
Yeah, I'd love to share them, and I'm happy to share them with anybody. And certainly, it'll be great to talk to. It'll be great to talk to people during the breakout. Yeah.
And was it yourself?
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank
Very good.
you.
Came late. I'm sorry for that, but yeah, enjoyed it. And back to the topic of the waste. Well, I'm living here since 4 years in Ireland. And I'm quite aware about waste, and I went to volunteer sometimes on my own, and there was a good land next to the place where I was living in Ferrybank, Waterford, and there was always rubbish on it, so I had to, and these 22 bags is what I got out from there, and I reported and see it and say it up. Nobody cares. See it, say it up. There is no feedback. The feedback comes always very late. They can delay, and so I think infrastructure has to change first before people. Plus, private companies, waste collection, it's not the solution. It should be public. From the general taxes we pay a lot as employees here in this country. It shouldn't be a choice, paying or not, for the waste collection. It should be mandatory for everyone through the general taxes. Because when I go to volunteer, I don't know where to leave the bags when I'm far from my home. Because nobody wants my bags, because they pay for the collection of the weight of the bags. So there is no point to education, of course, in the schools, very important for the future generations, not to dump any rubbish on the streets, roads, woodlands, anywhere. But private companies it's not a start point for this.
Yeah, I agree, and I suppose one thing that you know, I mean, you know, I'm not sure that I had in my slides. You know, France has introduced legislation since last January to cut out single-use plastics on certain products. So fruit and veg, and you know, I think we really do have to lobby. You know, we have to take out the pen and paper, the email, and lobby, because the answer isn't, you know, picking it up every week. It really isn't. It's facilitating. It's facilitating that, and I sort of, Fionnuala here could say an awful lot more, and she probably will. We're both actually in the tidy towns in our town, but we're in it from the biodiversity point of view. And, we would love to get, what we would love to do is actually take 1 week's rubbish, take it to the square, dump it out in the square and analyse it, and get the children involved, get the transition year students involved, the young people involved, and analyse it. And, I suppose in terms of, that's one morning in just one corner of the shop next door to me in one country. And, fossil fuel use, we engaged with students, a couple of months back, transition year students, and they weren't able to connect fossil fuel usage to the plastic bottle. Several of them, it was a class, and several of them arrived with the plastic bottle, and they didn't understand the connection. But as I say, France have already brought in this legislation since last January. And that's the kind of thing. We can't keep generating this waste. I have some more figures in terms of what's actually happening, our recycling waste, etc.
Exactly, yeah, recycling is a way, you get money back from your cans, bottles that you purchase in a shop. When you give them back to the store, like back in the days, 30 years ago, I remember cans, buying Coke cans, and I was giving them back, and I got some money back. Then people has the motivation to return all those bottles and cans. So system has to change from the top of the pyramid first, for us to volunteer and do some jobs, to be motivated, to keep motivated, because I lost motivation.
Yeah.
Because I can't change the country, the government, they can't rely on tidy town people cleaning or, this.
Yeah,
there's no point.
all local volunteers are getting a little bit exhausted with everything that's...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. We're actually a little over time, and I don't want to eat into the next speaker's time as well, so sorry about that. But we'll... Ursula will be around at lunch as well, so there's plenty of opportunity to have a chat with her then. And I think, as Padraig Fogarty as well said in his introduction to biodiversity, if you're not upset, he didn't do his job right. So I think the same kind of goes. We kind of have to be, have to know these things.
I didn't get to the relevant slide, but if I could give one more sort of plug, I'd ask people please to take a look at the DNFC, the Dublin Naturalists Field Club website, and take a look at the submission to the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And you'll also see a link there to wildflowers and the various reasons not to plant wildflower mixtures. So I think that might be useful.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks, Ursula.